Thank you for tuning in to the best parenting show on the internet, Post Daily Dose.
It's the Post. It's the Post. It's the Post. The Post Daily Dose. It's the Post. It's the Post. It's the Post. The Post Daily Dose. It's the Post. It's the Post.
Hey, what's up, gang? Big Papa here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic Friday. So I am actually at Foursquare Church. Thank you, Pastor Roger, for your generosity. Foursquare Church, Crescent City, California. Amazing people, amazing pastor, so focused on being trauma responsive and understanding the children in the community and the families in the community and their congregation. Pastor Roger always is so accommodating. Because I don't know, I guess it's because of the pandemic and everything that our Wi-Fi service at our house, which is out in the country, is not very good. And so Pastor Roger has been very accommodating in helping me when it comes to providing conference room space when I am doing webinars. He's been doing a lot of webinars lately, and I'm actually doing a webinar this morning. Today, it's not afternoon, and I'm actually going to let you guys have the fly on the wall view. Hey, buddy, Stefan from the Netherlands. As I continue this afternoon presentation, been going all morning. Now we're going to get into the afternoon, and just thought I'd let you guys, tag along. And got really good, got really heavy earlier. And so we're going to get back to it. It's time to go. Shh. You're just a fly on the wall, remember. Hey, guys, we're back. All right, how we doing? I hope everyone had a good little lunch break. We're going to go ahead and get kicking in our part 2 of our Parenting from Fear to Love virtual webinar. Okay, so actually now I'm standing up, so this is really cool. Pastor Roger at Foursquare Church allows me to use the space because I live out in the country in Crescent City, and because of all the pandemic stuff, the signal has not been very good out there. So he lets me come here, and I get to use the church. Their Wi-Fi is much better, and so that's a pretty cool message I got coming from Zoom. For boot camp most of it. Boss at me, we did, and of course she stopped us. Thank you for that. That's so cool. Thank you so much, Kay Wood. How very cool. Glad you found Karen. She was amazing woman as well. And how cool that you're here after 2004. That's awesome. So, okie dokie. Let's get our recording started back. Or to cloud, and alrighty, let's share our screen and get back to our PowerPoint. Perfect. Not that one. Where's my other PowerPoint at? Stop the share for just a minute until I find the right one. There we go. Show. Okay. Alrighty. Perfect. There we go. All right, guys. Hope you had a good break. Let me see. Get back in my flow here for a moment. Covered a lot of material so far this morning. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. Now we are going to get on down here. I left off talking about the 3 pathways of emotional expression. So let's get into that. The 3 pathways of emotional expression. There are attitudes, feelings, and behaviors, and these are very important. Then I want to get into, because we only have a couple more hours, then I want to get into some parenting tools and techniques. But the understanding is so very, very important. Attitudes. So the reason we have these pathways is because it helps us to transition from one moment to the next. And when we're able to do that, we're able to transition because the brain always perceives an event as a threat until deemed otherwise. I left off on saying that earlier. The brain always perceives an event, a novel event, as a threat until deemed otherwise. And so you have these pathways that allow you to transfer your energy to allow you to be able to shift and move and see something as not a threat, and then you're able to relax and you're able to go on about your business. Well, we have these 3 pathways: attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. And the thing is, we have traditionally viewed attitudes and feelings and behaviors in a negative way. And so because we view attitudes in a negative way, we then view feelings in a negative way, and we don't realize that this is so important. I hope what you guys can get from this is a new understanding of what you're seeing from your child. Let me slow down. I'm going to slow down. We have these pathways of emotional expression. You have them, your child has them, to allow you to make transitions from one moment to the next. Historically and culturally, we have identified attitudes and feelings and behaviors as negative expressions. We have identified your children rolling your eyes. We have identified talking back. We have identified acting out as negative expressions. And what we typically do with negative expressions is we want to suppress them. And I want to remind you what I said earlier. The amygdala, your brain's fear receptor, is always looking for a threat. So your brain's fear receptor is always looking for a threat. And the moment your brain's fear receptor sees a threat, it immediately mobilizes you. It mobilizes you into survival. So it's no longer, so remember what I said about the brain. Your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, only makes up 25% of your brain. The other 75% of your brain is literally your emotional brain. When your emotional brain gets hijacked by your amygdala, you are mobilized into survival. Your thinking gets confused and distorted. Your short-term memory suppresses. That's so important. It's so important. Your thinking brain gets hijacked by your emotional brain when you are stressed. Your emotional brain is connected to your body. Your emotional brain, your amygdala, sits on top of your brainstem, which holds all of your painful experiences, all of your trauma, which then goes down the spinal cord to your body, where trauma gets stored in our body and in our brain in a very fragmented way. So then what happens is your amygdala gets triggered, it activates your brainstem, and everything is a threat. Everything is a threat. Sounds are a threat. Sights are a threat. Temperatures are a threat. Touching is a threat. Behavior is a threat. So your amygdala gets activated and it wants to remove the threat. Attitudes. And we are so conditioned. We are so conditioned to believe that our children's attitudes are a threat. Where does this come from? See, I think for African Americans, it stems all the way back to slavery. all the way back to slavery, where you couldn't have an attitude or it was life or death. And for other cultures, I'm sure there was some other experience. You think about Jewish people in the Holocaust and the Native Americans, where an attitudinal expression would cost you your life. And so we have this severe cultural trauma that still is alive in our DNA. It's still alive in our brainstem. See, even though our bodies, our entire body, like physical body regenerates every 7 years, it's the energy of the memories that get passed forward. See, the energy of the memories get passed forward in that body. So even though the physical body regenerates every 7 years, the energy of the experiences get passed forward, because that's ultimately all we are, is energy. So we have this DNA, this cultural DNA, that say attitudes are not okay. Don't roll your eyes. I'll knock your eyes into the back of your head. We have this cultural negative conditioning that says feelings are not okay. Don't talk back to me. And if you say that one more time, this is going to happen. And then we have this behavioral cultural conditioning that says, you can't act like that. You can't act like that. If you do that, just bad things are going to happen. See that? Now, if you think about that, if you think about these 3 pathways of emotional expression being based in our own trauma experiences, these attitudes, the fear of attitudes that we have as parents, when your child has an attitude expression, can you imagine that being rooted in the trauma associated with slavery and with the Holocaust and with the Native American genocide and the wars fought by people and experienced by families, and the Great Depression, and all of these cultural traumas that we've experienced? I need to check something real quick. Yeah, make sure I was still had turned the recording back on. See how intense this gets? This gets so intense because we think we're just living in this moment, when the reality is we are just a culmination of all the experiences and all the years from generations and generations and generations. And those experiences have the ability to put us into survival. So we grow up feeling like attitudes are a problem. And then our parents have experienced that attitudes were a problem, and our grandparents, and then we can't even allow an eye roll without viewing it as disrespect. We call it as disrespect because that's kind of the best way, the best defense we have against saying why children can't roll their eyes or why they can't huff and puff or why they can't express their frustration, because it's because it's disrespectful. The reality is this has nothing to do with disrespect. The deeper reality is that long ago, attitudes were associated with the possibility of losing your life. So if a slave expressed an attitude, they could lose their life. Okay, so they could lose their children, they can lose their significant others. So if a Holocaust, if a soldier, a war victim of the Holocaust, if they expressed an attitude, they could lose their life. So that DNA is still programmed within our being. So we carry that forward, and we try to make these rationalizations and judgments for why our children can't do it, because we're not in the Holocaust anymore. We're not in slavery anymore. But we have carried forward these justifications for our fear. We've carried forward these justifications for our fear to allow us to continue to manifest them in our present. And so when our children have attitudes, we get so offended. You get so offended you don't even know what you're offended about. Your child rolls their eyes at you and you're like, oh my God, don't you be rolling your eyes at me. Like you are literally at risk, and you know you're not at risk. But you got all this programming that tells you that your child, it is not okay for them to roll their eyes. So then what happens is you suppress them down to their feelings. So they can't express their attitude, so you suppress them down to their feelings. Because when we get stressed, we try to suppress, control, suppress, and change. Control, suppress, and change. When we become stressed, we try to control, suppress, and change. We don't allow anything. We can't allow anything because everything is a threat to our survival, right? But that's just your brain. That's just your amygdala carrying and passing forward generations and generations and generations of survival imprints and messages. We have so many survival blueprints that exist in our brainstem that when we're stressed, we get activated, and that's what we see. So then your children have attitudes, you feel like it's life or death, and then they have feelings, and it's absolutely not okay. You can't yell, you can't cuss, you can't tell me you don't like something. That's not okay. That's disrespect. You're not going to disrespect me in my home. How many families have been destroyed over the fact that we believe expression of feelings is disrespect? How many families have been destroyed? How many children, how many adoptions have been disrupted? How many foster placements have been disrupted? Because we believe a child expressing their feelings is so disrespectful that it's going to cause us to die. See, you don't think about that consciously, but unconsciously, that is what happens. Unconsciously, we have so much trauma associated with feelings and not having feelings, hiding feelings, that when our children express their feelings, we feel like somewhere in the recesses of our being, somebody's going to die if they don't stop. But let me ask you something. Is it real? Is feeling expression actually that serious? It's not. It's really not. And then you drop down to behavior. See, then it starts to get more intense. See, in slavery, if the slaves got caught trying to escape, they'd get their feet cut off, right? They'd get their loved ones killed or taken away or sent away to other plantations. So there's this huge fear and anxiety around behaviors. And you think about that from a Holocaust perspective. Think about that for Native Americans. Think about that for us just as Americans in general. The trauma that we've lived in our society, and like so much of that is alive right now. So much of that energy is alive and that tension is alive because of everything that's going on around race. When you start experiencing the stress connected to race, you are dropping into the brainstem. We are not functioning from our thinking brain. We are functioning from our emotional brain. So it starts to get real scary because that ties into all the other stuff that's happened over the decades and generations of our nations and of our cultures and of our races. And then you drop down to behaviors. Behaviors are not okay. Right? You have all this generational conditioning that says behaviors are not okay, but what I'm going to tell you, I'm going to drop something on you, that when you're expressing your attitudes, if you can't express your attitudes, you're going to drop down to your feelings. If you can't express your feelings, you're going to drop down to behaviors. And in our society, if you can't express your behaviors, you only have one of two options. You're either going to become angry or you're going to become depressed. That's it. Those are the only two options. That's the final frontier of behavioral suppression, is anger and depression. And guess what? Anger and depression must come through behaviors. Anger and depression the energy of anger and depression must come out one way or the other. Whether it comes out in behaviors, whether it comes out in running away, whether it comes out in behaviors that are so great. I call this the trauma triangle. If you spend 6 months or longer in anger, depression, and behaviors, 6 months or longer in anger, depression, and behaviors, you are living in an environment of trauma. The entire family is living in an environment of trauma. Everyone is stressed out to the degree that they are living in trauma. And anger and depression have to come out. It's either going to come out through more negative behaviors, or it's going to come out through high blood pressure. It's going to come out through high cholesterol. It's going to come out through fibromyalgia. It's going to come out through irritable bowel syndrome. It's going to come out through ulcers. It's going to come out through migraines. It must come out. It's going to come out one way or the other. Whether you are acting it out or you are acting it in, it is coming out one way or the other. That energy has to transition. And so what happens in our society in mental health, we get so obsessed. And the reason we get obsessed, there's nothing I'm going to tell you that I can't show you how it works in the brain. There's nothing I'm going to tell you that I can't demonstrate to you how it works in the brain. The reason we become obsessed with behaviors is because our amygdalas become activated and on alert. So when our amygdalas become activated and on alert, it's hijacking our brain. Our emotional brain is hijacking our thinking brain. That's why Joseph Ledoux says in times of stress, your thinking becomes confused and distorted, and your short-term memory is suppressed because you cannot think clearly and you cannot remember. So your amygdala is tuned in on that behavior. Why? Because your amygdala is oriented for survival, but your amygdala is also continuing to stir up your brainstem where all your trauma's at. As long as your amygdala is stirring up your brainstem where all your trauma's at, you are going to feel overwhelmed, and the only thing that you're going to think to do is to control, suppress, or change. That is the only thing you're going to think to do. Control, suppress, or change when you are seeing a behavior, because we have so much conditioning that tells us that behavior is the worst thing in the world. But the problem is we don't realize that it starts with attitudes, and from attitudes it goes to feelings. And then it drops down to behaviors. If you spend enough time at anger, depression, and behavior, that's where you get diagnosis. That's where you get medication. That's where you get disrupted adoptions and multiple foster placements. That's where you get restraint. That's where you get families feeling out of control because they spend too much time in anger, depression, and behaviors. That becomes a conditioned experience, and we've got to work ourselves through that. But the only way we can get out of that is if we as adults stop feeling so threatened by behaviors. If we can stop feeling so threatened by behaviors, guess how much less we're going to feel threatened by attitudes and feelings? If a child is rolling their eyes at me, am I really at risk? See, in a rational state, I'm absolutely not. But when you get stressed, when your amygdala gets activated, you're not rational, you're irrational. So when they roll their eyes, you are making a big deal over something that's not a big deal. So then you suppress them into their feelings. And then they yell, or then they cuss, or then they threaten. And now your amygdala really feels activated and overwhelmed and at risk. And guess what? That's not okay either, because your amygdala has you in survival. And survival wants you to control or suppress or change. And the problem with that is that you won't allow that feeling expression. And so if you can't allow attitudes and you can't allow feelings, what possible option does the child have with all that energy that's coursing through their bodies? The only option they have is behaviors. The behaviors are going to come out. The behaviors have to be expressed, and they're going to express through anger or depression. And then that becomes a negative cycle, a negative cycle, a negative cycle, a negative cycle. Guess what? What happens if my child gives me attitude and I can stay regulated and not threatened enough and realize in that moment I'm not going to die? What happens? Nothing. They give you attitudes. They transition the energy. They adjust, and then they move on and do whatever they're supposed to do. Now think about that. Yeah, I heard you. I heard you. Well, my child doesn't move on. Your child doesn't move on because they are conditioned the same way you were conditioned. You are just as conditioned as your child is conditioned. They can't move on because they see a threat. And guess what? You can't move on either because you see a threat. Both of you feel threatened. Therefore, both of you are in survival. What happens when one of you stops? And says, "You're okay." You're okay. I'm not okay, and you keep saying that. Don't be therapizing me, and I'm sick of this family, and you don't even want me here. We're going to be okay. And guess what? That's not true. I do want you here. No, you don't. You don't show it. I'm running away. That'll make me really sad. I hate this family. You don't really want me here. You see that attitude I just gave, that eye roll? I'm just transitioning. I'm just adjusting the energy. Guess what happens? My child never drops into feelings when I can support their attitudes, They never drop into behaviors when I can support their attitudes and their feelings. But the problem is we don't support the attitudes. We don't support the feelings. We end up increasing them. We increase the attitudes. We increase the feelings. How do we do that? By telling them that they can't have them. By telling your child they can't do something, they're going to get in trouble. You're just adding fuel to it. When you tell your child, stop rolling your eyes at me, does that stop them from rolling their eyes at you? No, it doesn't stop them from rolling their eyes at you. It just causes them to go and express a feeling. When you say, hey, you watch it, don't you disrespect me? And they say, I didn't disrespect you. Now you're in feelings. And when you say, I'm not going to take this from you anymore. And they say, take what? I'm not going to take anything from you either. And before you know it, some holes get knocked in the wall, or some child's running away, or some parents having to restrain their child in the middle of the floor. Attitudes, feelings, behaviors. What happens if we stop getting so overwhelmed and we stop allowing all of our generational conditioning to overwhelm us and take us out of the present? As long as you are stressed, three things are happening. When you're operating out of fear, three things are happening. You are obsessing about the future. You're obsessing about the future. If I don't get this under control right now, what's it going to be like when he's 20? Even though he's 12 now. You are reacting from the past. You're reacting from your own past experiences that tell you that your child can't roll their eyes at you, can't talk back to you, they can't run away, they can't act out because something bad's going to happen based on something you've experienced before or all the stories you've heard before in the past. So you're obsessing about the future, you're reacting from the past, and guess what you're not doing when you're obsessing about the future, reacting from the past? Obsessing, reacting. Obsessing, reacting. Guess what you're not doing? You're not being present. You're not being present. And when you're not being present, you are not here. You are in some different place. And when you're not being present, you cannot stay connected and engaged with your child. You cannot create a healing moment. Let's move on. Hidden trauma triangle. I'm just going to touch on this real brief. You have all these different diagnoses. Depression, PTSD, ADHD, ODD, RAD, bipolar. I don't deal in any of those diagnoses. I stopped dealing in diagnosis 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I stopped dealing in diagnosis. Why? Because I understood very clearly that all of those different diagnoses that you come up with, which end up with medications, all of those different diagnoses, which ends up with different medications, a cocktail of medications, have fear, stress, and trauma underneath them. And unless you're dealing with the fear, the stress, and the trauma, you are not dealing with the root issue. And if you're not dealing with the root issue, you're only going to end up with another diagnosis and another medication. You got to deal with the fear, the stress, and the trauma. That's the hidden trauma triangle. We're always treating out here the fear, stress, and trauma, a manifestation of the fear, stress, and trauma. Alan Shore says, dyadic failures, the ability of two people, the failure of two people to regulate emotions. The failure of two people. What's the first dyadic failure? Not the mom and the child. The first dyadic failure is the mom and the dad. The husband and the wife, the boyfriend and the girlfriend, the man and the woman that create the baby. That's the first failure. That's the first dyadic failure. The second dyadic failure is the failure of the mom and the child. And dad's responsibility is to help regulate the mom so mom can help regulate the child. That's how it's always happened throughout history of mankind. Dad's role is to protect so mom can feel protected so she can take care of the kids. All right, so dyadic failure of affect regulation results in the developmental psychopathology that underlies various forms of later forming psychiatric disorders. What happens in homes where there is no dad? Where dad goes away. That's the first dyadic failure. Now you got mom. Now mom gets stressed out and mom's got to calm a child who's stressed out. Can mom do this? Not if she's stressed out and overwhelmed by missing dad or on drugs or depressed or whatever, or dad's creating domestic violence, or they don't have a home, they don't have food. See, you have all this failure in the original dyadic regulation, in the original dyad, the original dyad, two people. And that leads to later forming issues that we like to call and label as disorders. But disorders only lead to medication. And it's a whole formula. I did like a 2-hour presentation. If you go to Facebook, go to Post+Institute. Last year, it's like, I told you, there are 450 probably videos on there. I did a whole presentation. You have to go look at it. I'm wearing a light blue denim shirt. I'm in front of a board, and I start dancing to Prince when it starts. And that presentation is all about the hidden trauma triangle. And I think it's something to do with something about labels. So you can find it on the Post+Institute Facebook page. So go to Facebook, go to Post+Institute. Go to Post+Institute, go to live, go to videos, and then scroll down, and you'll see me. I'm in a denim shirt. It talks all about differential diagnosis. Dorothy Otnow Lewis, the author of a book called Guilty by Reason of Insanity, says differential diagnosis to doctors means I'm not sure what's wrong, but these are my hunches. She says, and I really recommend this book, Guilty by Reason of Insanity. She says, diagnosis in psychiatry, I have discovered, is as trendy as the cut of blue jeans or the length of skirts. The major difference between diagnosis and fashion is that diagnostic styles take longer to change. So now let's talk about the stress model. So we've talked about all this information this morning. Talking about the brain, the way the brain works, the way we look at it, what happens when we're stressed, what happens to us. Let's get to the stress model. The stress model is all of this really disseminated and put into a very simple formula. The stress model is my theory on human behavior, and it is very simple. It's so simple it can be applied to very complicated situations. The stress model says all behavior arises from a state of stress. There is no behavior that happens without stress. And what you have to understand is stress can be triggered through any of the sensory pathways, the 5 primary ones: what you see, what you smell, what you hear, what you taste, and what you touch. And then the 4 secondary ones, which is movement, digestion, temperature, and intuition. So you can become stressed through any of those sensory pathways. Your child will become stressed. Your child has a sensitive amygdala. They have a sensitive fear receptor. Do you have a sensitive fear receptor? If you have a sensitive fear receptor as the parent, you've got to begin breathing. Breathing is the one proven way. The one proven way discovered by Herbert Benson in the 1970s. He wrote a book called The Relaxation Response. Actually, it was discovered before him because he actually studied transcendental meditation. That's where he discovered the relaxation response. So Herbert Benson didn't actually discover it. He actually just put it into a book called The Relaxation Response. But it comes from transcendental meditation wisdom, which says the one proven way to interrupt your stress physiology is to breathe. But the first thing we do when we become stressed is we stop breathing. We stop breathing, and when you stop breathing, all of the bad stuff happens. The cortisol increases. When the cortisol increases, the adrenaline increases. When the cortisol and the adrenaline increases, you stop thinking clearly. Your thinking's knocked offline. Your short-term memory shut down, and you're either reacting from the past or you're obsessing about the future. You lose the present moment. The stress model says all behavior arises from a state of stress. I don't care what the behavior is. I have seen so many behaviors over my 20 plus years of working with children, and I've been teaching this model for, this is 20, I started teaching this model in 99 is when I first wrote about the stress model. So 21 years I've been talking about the stress model. When you become stressed, it is driving your behaviors. It is driving your behaviors. And in between the behavior and the stress is the presence of a primary emotion. There are only 2 primary emotions: love and fear. Love and fear. Love keeps you open. Fear puts you closed and in survival. What you have to understand about these 2 primary emotions is that anytime you become stressed, and remember, you can become stressed through any of your sensory pathways. Any of your sensory pathways can cause you to become stressed, which will automatically move you into fear. And when you move into fear, it's like you have this diminishing window of time. You have this diminishing window of time between your stress and your fear. This diminishing window of time to take that deep breath. Because that deep breath, that space between the stimulus and the reaction, or the stimulus and the response, that's your space and that's your opportunity to choose love instead of fear. Stimulus, boom, your cellular system immediately moves into stress. You get triggered, something scary, your child does something, you immediately move into stress, which immediately ties into fear, and then from there you drive your behaviors. You have a split second, series of seconds, to take a deep breath and calm yourself down. Dial your amygdala down. Dial your amygdala down. Dial your fear receptor down. Tell yourself, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to die. I'm not going to die. I want you guys to say that like a mantra. You might think that is the weirdest thing in the world. But when you are in survival unconsciously, that is exactly what you are feeling. You are feeling like you're going to die. And that's why you end up acting so crazy when it comes to your kids' behaviors. And that's why they keep acting so crazy, because they keep dropping into that I'm going to die when they're in that place of stress and fear. And then we just add to it. We just add to it. We just add to it. That's why children don't grow better. They only grow older. We've got to stop adding to it. We've got to give them an opportunity and a space to heal through their trauma reactions. But if every time your child gets stressed and scared, you get stressed and scared too, you're not giving them an opportunity to heal through their trauma reactions. You end up trying to suppress or control or change. Control, suppress, and change. CSC. Control, suppress, and change. You've got to calm yourself down and give your children an opportunity to heal through their trauma reactions with your emotional support. And the only way you can give them that emotional support is if you can stop in the midst of stress, in the midst of your fear, in the midst of in their behaviors. Calm yourself down and stay in the present moment. That's how you give them an opportunity. It is amazing when you don't get hijacked, when your amygdala doesn't get hijacked, when your child's amygdala gets hijacked. It's amazing. That's how you truly stay in control. And that's called influence. That's called influence. You have the ability to influence your child, but you have to stay regulated. Remember, regulation, operating within one's window of tolerance for how much stress they can handle, as opposed to dysregulation, moving outside of one's window of tolerance. When you can breathe in the midst of your stress and your fear, you have an opportunity to move over to a space of love. When you can move over to a space of love, now you have an opportunity to help your child move through their behaviors. A behavior is nothing more than a red flag. A red flag for the state of distress underneath. That's all it is. It is a red flag for a state of distress and fear underneath. When you can stop being so overwhelmed, and it's so difficult, it is so difficult. I've got a granddad raising his grandsons, and he gets so scared. And as soon as he gets scared, he goes right back to his blueprints. And when he goes right back to his blueprints, he's going right back to the way he was raised. He was raised by his own grandparents. So think about how this cycle is repeating itself. When he gets stressed and overwhelmed, he goes back to his blueprints. His blueprints come from the way he was raised by his grandparents, which means he wasn't raised by his mother. So see, and now he's getting stressed, and when he gets stressed and his blueprints get activated, he gets fearful. He starts acting in a way that creates more stress for his grandsons, and then guess what? He's going to have a hard time raising them. Because he can't slow down in the midst of the behavior and in the midst of the fear. And he can't calm his own stress. And when he can't do that, it becomes really, really, really difficult. It is through the expression, the processing, and the understanding of the fear that we can calm the stress and diminish the behavior. So all behavior arises from a state of stress. One of the things that parents oftentimes look to me for are answers and solutions to their child's problem behaviors. So I have become known over the last 20 years as one of America's foremost child behavior experts. And let me tell you why. And let me tell you why I believe that you are in fact the expert to your child's behavior. You, not me, are the expert to your child's behavior. Because what I do is I don't even focus on behavior. How do you become a behavior expert and you don't even focus on behavior? That seems like an oxymoron, doesn't it? I'm going to tell you how you do it. First of all, you have to realize that when you see behaviors, you get stressed. And when you get stressed, that drives your fear, and then that drives your behavior. And then what you're actually doing is you're reinforcing your child's behavior. Even if you're not doing it physically, you're doing it energetically. You're doing it vibrationally. You're doing it chemically. And when I say chemically, what I'm saying is cortisol. You're increasing your child's cortisol. So your child already has a background of trauma and stress sensitivity, so they already have a high degree of cortisol. And that high degree of cortisol is what drives their behavior. So when they become stressed and that stress triggers their fear, which triggers their behavior, you see that behavior, you become stressed, then you become fearful, and then you start reacting to their behavior with your behavior. So then what you end up doing is you just keep reinforcing the negative behavior with a negative state. And then you just keep getting the same thing, more of the same thing. Here's how I know you have the ability to be the expert to your child's behavior. Here's how you become a child behavior expert. I'm going to give you guys the answer to becoming a child behavior expert. And I'm going to slow down because I really want you to hear me. Here's how you become an expert to your child's behavior. Stop allowing yourself to become so stressed and so scared when they're misbehaving. When they're misbehaving, calm your stress, calm your fear, and see that their behavior is coming from stress and fear. So instead of focusing on the behavior, focus on the stress and the fear. Focus on your stress and fear first. Focus on their stress and fear second. So I had a mom years ago, one of my favorite moms. Her name is Nancy. Nancy emailed me one day. She said, my child lies nonstop about everything. And I told you guys, I wrote the book, Great Behavior Breakdown, talking about 27 specific behaviors. It's all rooted in this. She said, my child lies nonstop about anything and everything. She said, it drives me crazy. So what is that telling me? That's telling me her child is exhibiting a behavior. It's telling me that her child is stressed and her child is fearful. Doesn't matter. It doesn't. I heard someone. I heard you say, well, what do they have to be scared of? It doesn't matter. See, that's when your own stress and confusion starts to overwhelm you. Because you may not ever figure that out. It's not important. All you need to know is their behavior is coming from their stress and their fear. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to do. And you have to realize that their behavior is going to cause you stress and fear, which is going to cause you misbehavior. It's going to cause you to have a lack of understanding. A lack of understanding. And when you follow a stressed out child with a lack of understanding, you're only going to get more stress. So Nancy said, my child lies nonstop about everything, anything and everything. She said, drives me crazy. What do I do about that? And I emailed her back and I said, well, do you ever listen to her? She said, no. And I said, well, let's start right there. The next time, it was not lying, it was chattering. It was incessant chattering. That's what it was. My child chatters nonstop, incessant, compulsive chatter, talks about everything. I'll tell you about lying in a minute. My child talks nonstop about everything. What do I do about that? I said, do you ever listen to her? She said, no. I said, well, let's start there. And I eventually developed this into what I call the 10-20-10. I call this 10-20-10. And it essentially, I told the mom then, and that was 20 years ago, I said, start giving her 20 minutes of quality time and attention in the afternoon when she comes home from school, and give her 10. No papers, no newspapers, no TV. Just sit and listen to her and really listen. 20 minutes in the afternoon and 10 minutes in the evening. And I eventually added another 10, and that was 10 minutes in the morning. So it's called 10-20-10. You have a child who's acting out right now. I'm going to change someone's life. If you have a child who's acting out, start doing 10-20-10. And that's give them 10 minutes of quality time and attention first thing in the morning. Go in, lay beside them in bed, rub their back, rub their head, sit beside them. Just nurture them, love them, take care of them, listen to a question. Say nothing. You don't even have to say anything. We talk way too much. Say nothing. Talking creates more stress. Just be present. Be present. Be present. Think loving thoughts of your child. In that moment, give yourself 10 minutes to think loving thoughts of your child, and then give them 20 minutes in the afternoon whenever they come home from school or right in the middle of the day. I know a lot of kids are at school right now, which I think is amazing, or at home right now, which I think is amazing, because I think as terrible as this pandemic is it's putting families back together, and it's giving children an opportunity not to be experienced and exposed to all the stress that comes from school, even though it can be very stressful for the parents. I think that there are a lot of relationship breakthroughs happening right now during this pandemic time, because families are actually being together and they're actually getting into a rhythm, and that is a positive rhythm. Some obviously are struggling. Kind of went off on a tangent with that one, didn't I? So, 20 minutes in the afternoon, quality time and attention. Turn the television off, turn the music off, or whatever, and listen. I know this is the age of devices. Listen to this. You don't have to get your child to even turn off their device. It'd be great if you did. It'd be great if you did. It'd be great if you were able to build into the kind of relationship with your child. And I just heard someone slow down. Breathe, slow down. This works even if you have 7 kids. I want you to focus on the one that's the most challenging. Okay? Then you can apply to the others. And if you have 7 kids, here's what you can do. Here's how you modify it. Instead of giving them 10-20-10, I want you to give them 3-6-3. 2-6-2. I know you have a lot of kids coming at you. I understand that. Just dial it down. 10-20-10 is optimal. Just adjust from there. But in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. 20 minutes in the afternoon, 10 minutes in the evening. Your child doesn't have to put the device down. That's great. But right now, you might have a relationship where your child doesn't want to connect with you. You might not really authentically want to connect with your child. I remember the first time I did a hybrid of this. This was in the late 90s. This is the first time I ever did a hybrid of this. It's about 98, about 1998. I say that, I feel old. I was in a parent's home, and like I said earlier, I've done in-home work almost my entire career. So I've always been right in the soup of the family. I was sitting in the home, sitting in the living room, and I said to the mom, I just want you to I want you to practice putting your hands on your child for 3 minutes at a time. Or it may even been 2 minutes at a time. This little girl with a serious sexual abuse history. I'm pretty sure mom had a pretty serious sexual abuse history too. 2 minutes at a time. I don't want you to do anything else. And I said, when I come back, because I like to give little homework assignments, when I come back next week, we'll talk about it. Next couple of days, we'll talk about it. So I came back, and I said, what'd you do this time? She's like, yeah, I did. She said, it was so weird. She let me just put my hand on her. It was so weird. She said she was watching TV. I put my hand on her. She looked back at me, and then she just kept watching TV. That was the first affection, the first real affection that mom had towards that daughter in years. And I was just making this stuff up as God gave it to me. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just said, try this. And she did, and she was amazed. It all comes back to reducing stress and reducing fear and restoring connection. So if you're not at the place where you can do 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 20 minutes, dial it down. It may have to start with 30 seconds, but I want you to get up to 10-20-10. And I want you to do this for 2 weeks. 20 minutes in the afternoon, 10 minutes in the evening. You're not talking about anything. You're not putting any demands on your child. You're just breathing. You're calm. You're being present. You're being engaged. If they want to talk, let them talk. So I had mom do that. I just had her do the 20-10. I had her do it, and she never mentioned it again. But 2 weeks later, which is what brings me to this story, 2 weeks later, she emailed me, And she said, okay, Mr. Know-It-All. She's real smarty pants. Nancy, one of my absolute favorite people. Nancy Alice. I even get to call her by her middle name, first and middle name. Nancy Alice. We actually went on to write 4 therapeutic fairy tales for children called The Forever Child. And we still have some. I think you can still get them on Amazon. I don't know if we still have them in print or in circulation. But I know I have some like The Lies and Love. I have some of myself. So we went on to write these books together. And so she said, okay, Mr. Smarty Pants. Now, Nancy at the time was 67 years old. 67 years old. And her daughter was 9. Nancy said, every single night is a bath time battle. When I go into my daughter's bedroom, and I say, it's time for a bath. She falls out on the floor, kicking and screaming, flailing. She said, I jump on her because I can't have her kicking and screaming. So I jump on her and I hold her down. Basically, she was restraining her. I restrain her until she's calm. And then she gets up, she goes to the bathtub, and then she starts flipping. She sees the bathtub and starts flipping out again. But this time, she's going to take that bath, whether I have to get in there or not. Even if I have all my clothes on, I get in there and flipping out, and water's going everywhere. And we finally get that bath done, and then we both fall out of the tub exhausted. And you know what? She won't even go to sleep. After all that, she won't even go to sleep. What do I do about that? And so I remember texting Nancy. I was living in Oklahoma back in our original home because I had moved back home to help my mom with my nephew and my dad when he was dying of leukemia. And I remember being in my little bedroom there, and I said, do you ever listen to her? I emailed that back. And she said, wait a minute. I'm getting my stories mixed up. She said, what do I do about that? And I know what it was. So this Nancy Alice was the one I was saying about the non-incessant chatter. She said, I said, here's what I want you to do. The next time she starts flipping out on the floor, kicking and screaming, I want you to sit on the bed. I want you to take 3 to 10 deep breaths. I want you to get in touch with how you're feeling, and then I want you to email me back. That was my advice. And she emailed me back, and she said, well, that doesn't seem like very sound therapeutic advice. Nancy had been a marriage and family therapist for 30 years. She was such a smart ass. I just love that woman to death. She said, that doesn't seem like very sound therapeutic advice. So I emailed her back. I said, well, you called me for the advice. I didn't call you. Give it a shot. Let's see what happens. So about 4 days passed. And during that time, I'd gone from Oklahoma to California. I remember pulling into a hotel. And Nancy called me, and she said, you're never going to believe what happened. She said, I went into my daughter's bedroom. I said, it's time to take a bath. She started flipping out like she always does. But this time, instead of jumping on her like I usually do, I sat on the bed. I started breathing. I felt like an idiot sitting on the bed breathing while my daughter's throwing this big tantrum on the floor. And she said, but do you realize she completely stopped what she was doing, climbed up on my lap as if she needed a hug, realized that she didn't, and she then went and got in the bathtub. Nancy said, that was too much for my old heart. And that was the beginning of the end of their bath time battles. And what was the dynamic? 6 months later or so, I went out and actually spent some time with the family. The dynamic is that this little girl, when she was picked up by Child Protective Services at 3 years old, had lice on her so thick you could pick it up with her fingers, pick it off with your fingers. So she came from an environment of gross neglect. So baths, in fact, Nancy said it was It's so bad trying to wash her hair that she just stopped. Once a week, she'd take her to the hairdresser and let them deal with it, which probably helped, right? Because you couldn't consistently take a child who's going to absolutely throw a tantrum without tying them to a chair, which parents have done that in the past. But it removed the threat and removed the overwhelm of the dynamic. So it was that bad. So the little girl had the lice so thick on her, the thought of getting in the bathtub was like post-traumatic stress disorder. Every time she had to go get in the bathtub, it's like she was back in her home when she was 3 years old. She'd been adopted she was removed from her home at the age of 3 and then adopted. So it was like being back in her home. That's the essence of post-traumatic stress disorder. No longer is it home in Nancy's home. You're now reacting from the past. So you're reacting a past trauma. Well, then the other side of that is Nancy said that when she was a little girl, her older sister, used to get really mad at her and would just stand and scream in her face. And Nancy said, I would just freeze. Well, what does the amygdala do when it experiences stress? First, it freezes, and then it fights or it flees. So our brain freezes first, and then it fights or it flees. She said, I would just freeze. And so when this little girl was throwing this tantrum, Nancy was in her overwhelm, freezing, but jumping on her daughter and restraining her. Total negative feedback loop. So the daughter was demonstrating a behavior coming from her stress and her fear. It wasn't logical. It wasn't rational, because stress and fear is never logical and rational. But it's coming from her trauma. Well, then Nancy was getting triggered in her stress and fear, jumping on her daughter. And then them just continuing to go through that process for 5 years. For 5 years they did that. 5 years. 5 years they did that. But when I was able to help Nancy see that her daughter's reaction was overwhelming her, and she could learn to calm herself down and give her daughter space so her daughter could calm down, so that her thinking could come back online, she was able to start going and taking a bath. She could do it. And now this same daughter is 26, 27 years old and has children of her own. That's the stress model. Bruce Lee says one of the best lessons you can learn in life is to master how to remain calm. And let me tell you why that's important. Because of stress. Your amygdala is so sensitive. Our amygdala as adults is so sensitive. And if we've experienced trauma or neglect or loss in our family, in our lives, as adults in our early lives, if you experience, I'm saying this to you, you all as adults, if you experience early loss, early absence, parental early depression, early abuse, early deprivation, any of those things, if you experience an alcoholic parent, if you experience a divorce early in life, then your amygdala is sensitive to stress and definitely sensitive to any possible threats anywhere remotely connected to any of those experiences. And when your amygdala gets activated, it starts to utilize all of its resources. And when it uses all of its resources, you can't think clearly, you can't remember. So when you can breathe, learn to master your breathing. When you can learn to master your breathing, you are literally mastering your fear. You're mastering your stress. You're mastering your overwhelm. So your ability to remain calm, your ability to learn how to master the ability to remain calm makes everything else possible. There are infinite possibilities when we are able to remain calm. But it's not just that remaining calm, like, hey, just calm down. No, it's so much more intense, because your amygdala is hardwired to make you believe you are going to die. So it's not just a matter of remaining calm. It is a matter of mastering your amygdala that keeps making you want to feel like you're going to die, and then making you, go crazy and react from the past and obsess about the future. Well, the problem, guys, is that when we can't master our own ability to remain calm, guess what we can't do? We can't teach our children. We cannot teach our children. When we can't master our own ability to remain calm, we cannot teach our children. As long as we can master our own ability to remain calm, then we can start working with our children. When we can master our own ability to remain calm, we can create stronger relationships with our children. And when we can create stronger relationships with our children, we can go and we can say, hey, we're not going to do that anymore. Because you have a relationship and you allow the relationship to influence. But anything else is about control. And anytime you're trying to control, suppress, or change, you know you're stressed. You know you're in a place of fear. So practice your breathing when you're calm, not when you're stressed. Because when you're stressed, you're not breathing. When you're calm, not when you're stressed. And then you start to create the possibility, the opportunity to help support your child in their stress, realizing that their stress is tied into their trauma. That's how we heal trauma day in and day out. You don't have to be running off to therapy. You don't have to be going all these magic, mumbo jumbos and doing this medication, all this diagnosis, this therapy and that therapy. All you've got to do is learn how to remain calm in the midst of stress. And when you can do that, you begin to teach your child how to do it. And once you begin to teach your child how to do it, then you are able to begin having some conversations with your child, healing conversations about the pain they've gone through. You can restore your relationship. When you can restore your relationship, all things are possible. All things are possible. Call that the relationship factor. All right. What time is up? What's up, Eric guy? What time is it? I'm gonna have to. I can't see the time. Oh, it's 2:20. Okay. 3 things every parenting tool should avoid: fear, threat, and isolation. But have you ever noticed that those are the most common things we do? Fear, threat, and isolation. Think about this. Something to consider. Boot camp tactics, behavior modification, logic and reasoning. What do these things have in common? Fear, threat, and isolation. The most common things we do with our children, the most common things we are raised to believe about our child raising, our child rearing practices are all rooted in the generational implications and the generational conditioning of fear, threat, and isolation. All of them. All of them. And I know this is really challenging for some of you, and it's not as challenging as it might have been this morning if I had started with this slide, because I feel like I've felt some shifts already. When you're creating more stress, in the presence of stress, you're just going to get more stress. These are the most common things we do with children. Here's what you need to understand. Boot camp tactics like jumping jacks, excessive chores, isolation, timeout, spanking, consequences, yelling, physical tactics like restraint, medication rather than modification of relationships and environments. What you have to understand about all those things is that they're rooted in fear. They're rooted in reactivity, and they're rooted in stress. And the problem with this is that we are conditioned to believe that this is what we have to do to control children's behaviors. But remember, if you're seeking to control, suppress, or change, you're actually just going to increase the behaviors. This is why children grow older, but they don't grow better, because we use these common parenting techniques. These are the most common things we do at homes and in schools and in churches, right? Because we view the behavior as a threat. But what happens if you stop viewing the behavior as a threat? If you stop viewing the behavior as a threat, you can actually move into a possibility of being able to teach your child through repetition something different, because that's how the brain changes. So you got 2 things that go on. You got this reactivity and fear-based experience, right? You want to know what these things do? What these things do is they change the brain's chemistry for a short period of time. Timeout, isolation, spanking, consequences, behavior modification. They change the child's brain chemistry for a short period of time. But guess what they don't actually do? They don't actually train the brain to pursue a different pathway. They don't train the brain to pursue a different pathway. All they're doing is changing the chemical reaction. They're changing to they're creating a chemical reaction. All you're creating a chemical reaction, it's short term. And so then because you create this short-term chemical reaction, then what you're not doing is you're not giving the child the repetition, the opportunity to literally create a new pathway. You know, because I said, as I showed you earlier in the slide, the amygdala never forgets a pathway because it never forgets a memory when it's been activated. But what it can do is it can learn new pathways. That's how we change the brain, by teaching the brain a new pathway. But if what you're doing is creating more stress and more fear, then you're not creating new pathways. All you're doing is reinforcing the trauma-based pathways that already exist. I got to say that again. If you're not creating new pathways through repetition, through emotional support, through understanding, if you are using fear and stress and isolation in your practices towards your children, what you're doing is you're only reinforcing the trauma-based pathways that already exist. You're just reinforcing it. See, these things go all against our traditional parenting practices. These are the most common things that we do in parenting. And I'm here in Crescent City, and literally 5 miles outside of town, which is only like 2 miles from my house, is Pelican Bay Penitentiary, maximum penitentiary, Pelican Bay. Right out there, the death penalty. The worst, some of the worst criminals in the world. Charles Manson was at Pelican Bay. That's 2 miles from my house. 5 miles from this church that I'm in right now is the death penalty. And you know what all of these things, timeout, isolation, spanking, consequence, behavior modification, yelling, restraint, you know what all these things have in common with the death penalty? Is they're on the same continuum. They're all on the same continuum of fear. They're all on the same continuum of reactivity. They're all on the same continuum as creating more stress. And then you ask the question, well, Brian, why do we do them? Why do we do them? I'm going to tell you why. Number one, we do them because it's generational. It's what we have learned is necessary for survival. That's number one. It's generational, it's genetic, our DNA has been changed. We just believe it, it's automatic, it's hardwired into our amygdala. That's why we do it, number one. Number two, the number two reason we do it is because it creates change. It creates change with 70% of children. With 70% of children, you can give them timeout and it'll create behavior change. You can give them isolation, you can spank them, you can give them consequences, you can take their stuff away, and it'll create behavior change with 70% of children. But guess what? What's the secret? With 70% of children, anything you do will work. Anything you do will work. With 70% of children, all you got to do is raise an eyebrow. All you got to do is raise your voice a little bit. With 70% of children, you can do anything, and their behaviors will change if you use enough repetition. Because 70% of children, they have a brain capacity that allows them to regulate stress and stay regulated in the midst of stress. 70% of children have never experienced severe trauma that has gone unexpressed, unprocessed, and misunderstood. 70% of children don't have trauma brains. They've experienced a lot of stress, and they probably went through a lot of painful things, but they've had enough consistent, attuned, secure parenting that their brain has repaired enough to be able to handle most stress. So when you truly don't want to do anything different except what you learned as a child and how you were raised, and we all have this prerogative, when you truly don't want to try to create a different relationship with your child who's not experienced all that trauma, you can do 70% of this, because anything you do will change. They'll change anything you do. But 30% adopted kids, 100% of adopted kids, 100% of foster kids, you do these things, it's just going to create more stress. It's going to create more stress, more fear, more trauma. These things utilized with adopted and foster children just makes it worse. This is why they grow older, they don't grow better, because these things do not allow their brains an opportunity to heal. These things are only oriented towards short-term behavior change. That's all. Time out. Time out is just an isolation technique. When I was a kid, instead of time out, it was sticking your nose in the corner, putting the dunce chair sitting in the dunce chair with the dunce cap. See, time out is, you don't want to do time out. You want to do time in. Children don't act out for behaviors. They don't act out for attention. They act out because they need attention. So when you give a child time out, which is just another modification of isolation, just another modification of sending them to their room, you're actually taking a stressed out child and putting him in a place by himself, putting his nose in the corner, sitting in the timeout chair. What that's not doing is that's not supporting his state of stress and his state of fear and his state of overwhelm. What it's doing to your adopted child, what it's doing to your foster child, is it's making them feel more rejected. It's making them feel more insecure. So you're not breeding any great security in your adopting your foster children. Because all these things on the reactivity and fear-based side of the continuum, guess what? They are all geared towards external change. They're all geared towards external change. They're not geared towards internal change. They're not geared towards developing the regulatory system and expanding the window of tolerance and helping children learn how to express and process through their pain and through their trauma so they can develop more ability to be resilient. They can develop more strength of their window of tolerance. See, these things don't do that. All these things do is control the child externally. And as long as you're controlling the child externally, all they're going to do is get older. They're just going to get older. They're just going to get bigger. They're not going to get better. But these are the most common things we do in our society, sending kids to their room or sending them away to residential or sending them away to group homes. It doesn't help. It's not changing their brains. I got 2 kids right now who've been in residential for 3 years. They come back from being in residential treatment for 3 years, and within weeks, it is chaos in the home. Nothing changed. They grew older. They did not grow better. I may even have more than that. I think I have like 3. They grew older, they did not grow better. Spanking. Come on. Surely we've evolved further than spanking. But you know why you spank? You know why parents still spank? Because of frustration. That's the only reason. You can use any kind of justification you want, but really you spank from frustration. You hit from frustration. Your amygdala immediately sees that behavior is a threat, and you hit, it's fight, flight, or freeze. You hit, you fight. You fight because your amygdala sees it as a threat, and you fight, you hit. You think that is going to move your child along the way. All it does is create more stress and more fear. But what about the Bible? Since I'm in the holy building, since I'm here in the church at Foursquare, spare the rod, spoil the child. That's a misconception. The rod and the staff were used in the raising of sheep by the shepherd. The rod was used to guide, and the staff was used to pull the sheep back in the line when they stray. The rod and the staff were never meant for the shepherd to beat his flock with. Because if the shepherd beats his flock, guess what? They get scared. And when sheep get scared of their shepherd, they run away. Spare the rod means spare a child guidance, and they will be spoiled to the ways of the world. What happens? And I grew up in a home. Where the rod was not spared. The rod was not spared. The rod was doled out heavily and mightily. And it was doled out in the form of a leather belt in most situations, wielded by a grown man. So when I grew up in a home where there was no sparing of the rod, but when you have that misunderstanding, and you feel like sparing the rod means sparing a child punishment, like harping more punishment upon them, heaping more punishment upon them, what you're doing is you're creating more stress, and you are losing the time that you have for healing. I don't know at what age it was that my parents started spanking us. When the spanking grew up into whipping. But all that time is lost time for your child to heal. That's what happens. We start operating from these parenting practices of stress and fear. And what happens is we lose time. I work with a lot of teenagers. And almost every one of those teenagers and the families of those teenagers adopted when they were little. 5 years old, 3 years old, 5 months old. But their traditional fear-based parenting practices over years and years and years of not being effective, but not knowing anything else, eventually led them to my doorstep, or me to their doorstep. What would have happened if we could have done something different way back then? And that's really what I really want. And if it's never too late. It's never too late to apologize, to ask for forgiveness, and to do better. It's never too late. It's never too late. You can do better than spanking. When you spank, your child just becomes afraid of you. Child becomes afraid of you, they're just going to stray. My sister, she strayed. 15, she strayed to what she thought was safety, and there was no safety. It just got more scary. Consequences. I probably encountered more parents who have been inundated with the thought and the philosophy of giving their child consequences than anything else. Because the love and logic movement is such a big movement. It's been around for years and years and years. Love and logic. Giving children consequences for their behavior. But here's the problem. If you understand, as I hope you're beginning to understand the things I've talked about so far. Children are acting out because they are stressed out. And that stress is oftentimes coming from their trauma. And that trauma is usually rooted in an emotional experience, an early emotional experience. When you give a child a consequence for their behavior, what you're actually doing, number one is that you're actually punishing them for their behavior. And that behavior comes from their trauma. So you're punishing them for the bad things that have happened in their life. Number two, by just focusing on the behavior, you're not actually creating an opportunity for them to learn, because a stressed out child is a child who is not thinking clearly and cannot remember. So when a child is stressed out and they're acting out and you give them a consequence, they don't remember it. So they don't learn from it. And then they come to see you as a threat. I got so many whippings as a kid. My sister got so many whippings. You guys do your little consequences of taking away your toys, and my parents did all that stuff. You do your little timeouts, your little yelling and threatening and all that kind of stuff. I got so many whippings. I got so many whippings as a kid. You don't even understand. My sister got so many whippings as a kid. And my dad was not a small man. He was a big man. It got so stressful in my home growing up that my mom said one day, she said, I was so stressed and felt so helpless. I almost hit your sister in the head with a hammer, because she could not think of anything else to do except hit harder. And it never worked. It never worked. I am telling you from a man who comes from experience, not just 20 years, over 20 years of working with families, but I come from a lifetime of experience in telling you what doesn't work and why it doesn't work. And you can try to refute it because that's the way you were raised. You were spanked and you turned out okay. Total BS. I'm not going to cuss in the church. Catch me outside of church, I'll probably drop some cuss words for you. Total BS. You were spanked. You did not turn out okay. You didn't turn out okay. Get honest. You are stress sensitive. You get easily overwhelmed. And now you whip your kids. It's not turning out okay. That is a rationalization and a justification we use. It's not going to work. Now, 70% of children that don't have trauma, you can spank them. You can spank them. My friend Patrick, he got spanked. He was an only child. He had early trauma in his life. And he got whipped, he got spanked. But guess what? He had a brain that could tolerate stress. He still acted out. But he had a brain that he can tolerate stress. But I get spanked, I get whipped. My brain can't tolerate stress. All it does is shuts me down for a moment, and then I just figure out how to get more sneaky. So it does nothing for the repair of my brain. It does nothing for the repair of your child's brain. These things, all of them, not one or two, all of them, timeout, isolation, spanking, consequences, behavior modification, yelling, physical tactics, they all do nothing for the healing of your child's brain. Nothing. And you've been doing them and your child has been experiencing them for years. And here's the thing. You've got to stop doing the same thing, expecting a different result. It's all coming from stress. We got to stop creating the continuation and the perpetuation of stress and fear in our society and with our relationships with our children. We have to be willing as adults to have more courage, not the absence of fear, but the ability to go forward in its midst. And we got to have more faith. We got to have more faith that we can truly love our children and it'll make a difference. We got to have more faith. Last time I spanked my child, I was in graduate school. This is my 25-year-old. She's now 25 years old. She's a social worker, great, passionate young woman. Passionate. Loves working with kids and loves working with families. Last time I spanked her, and I don't even know if I had really spanked her much before then, but she was about 18 months old. About 18 months old. And I was in graduate school or with her mom. And it was early. I was, 25? I was 24 years old. So she was about 2 years old. It was so long ago, I still bald-headed. I still shaved every morning. Her mom and I were arguing in the kitchen. And we lived in a little apartment. We were upstairs. She was ironing clothes. And I was standing there, I was, fixing my little breakfast. And we were just bickering. We were young and we were stressed. And we were just doing the best we could. And I was in graduate school. I'm not sure what part of that. Oh, the part that makes me emotional is her mom's not with us anymore. She passed away almost 6 years ago now from Crohn's disease. And she was a beautiful person. And she was a great mom. And that's part of why I have a great daughter. So we were bickering in the kitchen, and Michaela came in. She was naked early in the morning. I was the hippie. Her mom just went along with me. I'm like, let the kid walk around naked all she wants. So we were in the kitchen bickering, and not even yelling. We're just bickering. And Michaela stood right between us, and she started to pee on the floor. And I got so mad, and I picked her up. I swatted her on the butt. And I said, you don't pee on the floor. Pee goes in the potty. And I took her. And I'm bigger now than I was then. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'1". I take her, put her on the pot. And I set her on the pot and I say, pee goes in the potty, not on the floor, in the potty. And I'm standing there. And she's looking up at me. And the biggest tear formed in her eye and it started to roll down her face. And I'm looking at her, and I just melted. I got so many whippings as a kid. And none of it worked. None of it made anything any better. I was able to get through. Thank God my parents loved us hard enough and deep enough in the time between the whippings. But I looked at my daughter and that tear rolled down her face. And I just melted. And I got down in front of her on my knees and I said, honey, I am so sorry. Daddy will never whip you again. Daddy will never hit you again. So sorry. And I said that and I meant it. I was 24 years old. The stress model didn't exist. It didn't exist. Brian+Post did not exist. I was just a kid going to school, doing the best I could with a kid raising a kid. And when I said that, I meant it. I never raised my hand to any of my kids ever again after that. Of course, I went on to learn differently. I went on to learn differently. I went on to do differently. And I have amazing kids. I have amazing kids because I came to love myself enough that I could love them. I came to face my own fear enough that I could stay in a loving space with them. And I remember as a young parent, me and Michaela, we were, I think I said this earlier, I've got a 27-year-old adopted son, adopted when he was 15. I've got Michaela who's 25, and then I have Marley who's 17. I remember one day me and Michaela were in the pool and we were playing, and I just felt like the worst dad in the world because I did not know how to play with her. I did not know how to play with her. And I just remember kind of pulling myself over by the edge of the pool, and she was happy, she was having fun, and I just felt so sad because I didn't know how to play. My mom and dad played the best they could, but playing was not their thing. It wasn't their thing. And so they did the best they could, and then I realized in that moment, I need to do what feels good. I need to play with my child in a way that feels good for me. That's a way that works. And we started taking more walks and playing less Barbies and taking more walks. And we would wrestle instead of putting on makeup and doing hair. And and occasionally we would do hair and makeup. But I had to learn to do what I could in a way that felt connected and felt relational. And then, of course, after time, I learned why I didn't want to do these kinds of things. So what do? What can you do? Well, here's the thing. You're gonna have a hard time with this. I'm gonna tell you, you're gonna have a hard time with it. Oh, I should talk about consequences because it's so common. Consequences. I don't even want to talk about it. It's so common. Consequences don't teach children responsibility because that's the thing. Love and logic says you give children consequences to teach them responsibility. There's no scientific proof from that. In fact, scientifically, it's actually just the opposite. Consequences are not, because children learn primarily through modeling. The act of giving a child a consequence for their behavior is not modeling responsibility. It's actually modeling reactivity. You can't responsibly give a child a consequence for their behavior, because if you're really responsible, then number one, you understand your role in the dynamic, and number two, you understand the child's history that's driving the behavior to begin with. See, that comes from a place of clear thinking, rational thinking. This whole never let them see you sweat, this whole, give them a consequence while you smile at them, that stuff's disturbing. That's not authentic, it's not connected, it's not real. It's just not. It's false. It's inauthentic parenting, and it eventually comes out. You know how it comes out? I'll tell you how it comes out. It comes out because you start doing this kind of stuff with your kids when they're young, and then when they hit adolescence, it don't work anymore. It doesn't work anymore. Because ultimately it's based in passive-aggressive control. You can give a child a consequence or threaten them with a consequence. It's passive-aggressive control. But when they become adolescents and you've lost the relationship over years, guess what? Your consequences don't matter anymore. Your consequences don't matter. They don't matter. Your adolescent is now going off and finding other kids they feel connected to. And so it doesn't matter. And then you end up losing because you've lost relationship. Relationship is the single most important thing. It is the single most important thing. And once you lose the relationship, you lose everything. Don't lose the relationship. The relationship always gives you the ability to influence your child. So consequences don't teach responsibility, they teach reactivity. And that's very important. And then behavior modification, it's all focused on behavior. See, all these things are focused on behavior. On this reactivity, fear-based side, timeout, isolation, spanking, consequences, behavior modification, yelling, physical tactics, like restraints, all focused on behavior. None of it's addressing the stress and the fear. And that's the paradigm shift. None of these most common things are addressing the stress and fear. That's the paradigm shift. Do time in. Time in says bring the child towards you. Why do you bring the child towards you? Because a child who has gone outside of their window of tolerance or being able to regulate their stress is an acting out child, which means their regulatory system isn't strong enough to deal with the stress they're experiencing in the moment. So they need time in. Time in, you create a new vibration, you create a supportive vibration, an understanding vibration, a regulating vibration for your child's brain that's stressed out. You actually give them support. See, when you do these other things, you're not supporting your child's emotional state. You're actually making it worse. Oh, man, that's frustrating. It's so frustrating to have professionals teaching parents who are already feeling desperate and stressed and helpless and overwhelmed. It's so frustrating to have professionals teaching parents to do things that just make it worse. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? You know why? Because we get stressed and scared and we don't own it for ourselves. I can say I'm a professional. I'm free of fear. BS. BS. Just because I'm professional, I'm probably more fearful than you as a parent is. So I have more responsibility to do my own work. I have more responsibility to be courageous. I have more responsibility to stand beside you when you're afraid and we're looking at your child's behavior, which is more fearful. I have more responsibility. But we don't do that. We don't do that. We just medicate and we just diagnose and we just make it more of the child's fault. That's all we do. And then you just get helpless and scared and overwhelmed. You lose relationship with your child. And then it just gets worse. We got to stop doing that. We got to stop doing that. Containment. Reducing the space that you have for your child to be able to operate within. We're going to need to take a break here in a little bit. Containment is reducing the space. You don't let a child have the whole playground if they're prone to being stressed out and they go and hit other kids. They bite other kids. You don't do that. You reduce the space. You give them less space to feel threatened with. So I was on a consultation call one time with a school and a parent from Alaska, and the school was like, because I said, you got to do containment, reduce the space of the playground that he has. He can't handle all that. He gets too stressed out, and when he gets stressed out, he becomes aggressive. And they said, isn't that punishment? It seems like reducing the space on the playground is punishment. No, that's not punishment. See, that's called taking responsibility. That's called saying, hey, little guy, I'm sorry I've been letting you have so much of this playground. I didn't realize how stressful it was. I didn't realize how threatening it was. This is your area of the playground now. In this area, I can keep you safe. And I know when you feel safe, you don't hurt other little kids. And I'm sorry I hadn't figured that out before. So no, it's not punishing. It's punishing the child. Now think about this paradigm shift. It's punishing the child when you know you have a stress-sensitive, fearful child who gets stressed out, can't regulate his emotional surges, and then he hits and he bites and he kicks other little kids. It's punishment to let him have the whole playground. It's just a paradigm shift, guys. It's just a different way of seeing things. Understanding the dynamic of fear, breathing, patience, discipline, affection. You can't be affectionate. You can't be affectionate when you're stressed out as a parent. Discipline. Well, I heard you. What about discipline? You got discipline on the love-based side. What about discipline? No. The definition of discipline is to teach, not to punish. To teach, not to punish. The definition of discipline is to teach, not to punish. If you want to teach your child, you have to make sure that their brain is not in a place of stress and overwhelm. You got to make sure their brain is not in a place of stress and fear and overwhelm. You got to make sure their brain, their short-term memory is activated. Remember, in times of stress, your thinking becomes confused and distorted, and your short-term memory is suppressed. Your short-term memory is turned off. When I was a kid, I was 5, 6 years old, my dad You know, he should teach us math facts. We used to have flashcards. You know, Dad wanted us to be smart. He wanted us to be successful. My dad didn't finish the 8th grade. He didn't finish the 8th grade, so he has all this stress and this fear about us not doing good in school. He wants us to do good, but in his stress of us not doing good, his behavior would come out. So he'd be teaching me his flashcards when I was 6 years old. I mean, 6, 7, I was young. I don't remember how old I was. I remember sitting next to his bed, next to the dresser that my mom still has, next to the lamp, and my dad told me to do a flashcard, and I couldn't get it. I was not a math kid. My brain couldn't get what 8 minus 3 was. My brain couldn't get what 9 plus 8 was just like that. You know, I was one of those finger counters. I had to learn to count, but Dad didn't want me to count. He wanted me to memorize it. He wanted me to commit it to memory, so I'd miss it. Bam, he popped me upside the head. I'm stressed. Now I was already stressed. Now I'm really stressed. And then he flashed another, and I miss it. Bam, he hits me again. I can't remember. I can't think clearly. I can't remember. I can't think clearly. I never liked math. Never liked math. I'm not big on numbers right now. I'm better at it. I can take more responsibility because now I can calm myself down and I know my origins. I understand. I am aware. So I can slow down. But I sit down with my bookkeeper and my CPA and they start going over too many numbers. I'm like, you guys figure that stuff out. I'm going to go work with some families. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go work with some families. My dad was doing the best he could. He was doing the best he could. He thought he was disciplining. That's not discipline. That's punishment. The definition of discipline is to teach, not to punish. That requires us to have to slow down. Here's some things. Creating a therapeutic environment. Let's, oops. Got a few questions here. Probably need to take us a little 5-minute break. Let me stop the share. All right. You have a discipline on your puzzle list. Oh, yeah, you got that. Okay, man. Yeah, all right. Perfect. Ooh, that's a long one. Okay. Oh. No, I don't guess I see any more questions. Guess it was that discipline one. I think I answered that. Takes time. All right, guys, let's take a 3-minute break because, like I said, we're gonna probably break off early, and I'm not gonna hold you here till 4 o'clock. You've been such great students and so attentive. So I got some assignments to get you to the 4 o'clock period. All right, so let's take a 3-minute break, and I will see you then. Hey gang, how you doing? How's my Facebook post family? It's good to see you guys. Hello there, Mimi. I'm actually scrolling. The thing is, comments are actually scrolling today. So good to see you, everyone. Happy freaking fabulous Friday. I was asked to do this for an agency, an adoption agency out here in California. So I've been doing a lot of virtual presentations and didn't bring you guys on this morning. Just wasn't feeling it. But I want to, let you drop in this afternoon and just get a little daily dose. We're going to call this the daily dose for the day. So I hope it's been informative and insightful for you. And I will see you Monday. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. All of this stuff, guys, is on all the post daily dose. There's over 400 of them. Study one a day. Go to Post+Institute YouTube page. I also have a Brian+Post YouTube page. I just posted a commentary. I told you guys this yesterday. I posted a commentary on a situation between the police officers and 2 African-American teenagers in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is my home state. And so go check that out. We'll probably post that up on our Facebook page just for everyone to check it out. But hope this has been informative. I've got 2-hour, 6-hour presentations all in these videos on Facebook. So you guys take care of yourself. God bless you. Big Papa loves you. Remember, in any given situation, you always have 2 choices. You can continue to react from the same blueprints of stress, fear, and overwhelm, or you can stop, slow down, and choose love. Take your 3 to 10 deep breaths and choose love. Love is always available to us. It's just not always easily accessible when we're feeling stressed and afraid. You guys are amazing. Go be amazing. Go look in the mirror. Go look in the mirror and say, I am a good parent. I am a good parent. I am a good parent. I love you.